This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Brazil's far-right President Jair Bolsonaro formally launched their presidential campaigns this week, a new film coming out Friday documents the struggle of the indigenous Uruewa people in the Brazilian Amazon against the deforestation and destruction of their land by farmers and others illegally extracting resources. It's called The Territory. This is the trailer.
This forest and its rivers are our home. They give us life. The Uruewa territory is like a barrier against deforestation. Everything's gone. I believe the Amazon is the heart, not just of Brazil, but the whole world.
For those who live here, the Brazilian dream is to own some land and make your living from it. We'll plant some crops to move our Brazil forwards. I've never seen Indians there. People say they're there, but I've never seen them. It's just talk.
It makes me sick knowing we're considered criminals, like we're the ones hurting the country.
I think there's somebody up ahead. Go.
For some, the land is their heritage. For others, it is a new frontier. They all call it home.
The Association of Rio Bonito says that they want our land. But I think they want more than that. They want us to disappear. We're not going to let that happen.
The Territory was filmed over 3 years, including during the pandemic, and much of it was filmed by the Indigenous activists themselves. This week, I sat down with two of the people it features and its director, Alex Pritz. This is his first film. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, winning both an Audience Award and Special Jury Award for Documentary Craft. I asked Alex Pritz to begin by talking about what inspired him to make The Territory and why he called it that.
For me, the journey behind The Territory really started when I read about the work of Nadinha Bandeira, the activist at the center of the film. I had read about her work protecting the Amazon rainforest, working to defend Indigenous lives, and just felt so inspired by this woman who, against all odds, in a part of the world where everybody was against her, an extremely hostile environment, was proudly standing up in defense of this beautiful planet that we all have. And so I reached out to her during the campaign, the 2018 presidential elections in Brazil, when we saw this really divisive, inflammatory rhetoric coming from the Bolsonaro campaign, and said, look, it looks like your work is about to become much more difficult really quickly. Could I come and meet you in Brazil? And that was sort of where it began.
And take us on that journey. Tell us the story.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Nadinha's got this gravitational energy and just pulls you right in. So arriving in Brazil, I had a lot of ideas about what types of films I wanted to make. Nadinha sat me down really quickly and said, whatever you think the film is about, it's not about that. Introduced me to the Uruewa community, an indigenous group that is defending an area, about 7,000 square miles of rainforest, 2.5 times the size of the state of Delaware. Huge area of pristine rainforest, crucially important for climate change and keeping the guardrails on the worst effects of our changing climate. And it's being defended by a group of 183 people. And so, between Nadinha and her relationship with the Uruewa, forged a story about the defense of the rainforest, trying to bring in the perspective of some of the farmers and settlers that are also invading, burning, and attacking this forest as well.
And that was what is so unusual also about The Territory, your film, is that you talk to the people that the indigenous people call the invaders, talk about the settlers and the farmers and their response to you in this film as they understood that you were doing a film about the people they consider their enemy, or do they?
Yeah, I mean, the motivation and the impetus to reach out to these invading farmers and settlers came from conversations with Bitete and Nadinia, who said, look, if you want to understand the source of this violence and the root of this conflict, don't just talk to us. You know, we're on the receiving end of this conflict, but go talk to the people that are lighting fire to the rainforest, who are out there chopping away at it. And they'll speak to you because you're American, and they have this cultural, ideological admiration for America because of its, ideas of manifest destiny and the westward expansion and dispossession of native lands that occurred here. These settlers and frontiersmen in Brazil really do hold America in very high esteem for that reason. And through a lot of conversations and moving past their kind of initial skepticism, we were able to forge some relationships with these farmers that allowed us to get some insight into what it is that's really driving this conflict in Brazil.
And do they understand the danger that Indigenous people feel and the whole issue of the climate catastrophe and the Amazon being the lungs of the planet?
Yeah, I mean, I think small subsistence farmers, as well as anybody, are feeling the effects of climate change. The people that we spoke to said, of course we understand the climate's changing. That's a given. They viewed land almost as a disposable commodity. They said, we need to go get fresh land because the land here has all been too degraded and requires too many fertilizer inputs. So they do have some ecological awareness, but I think the historical context of their actions, the scope of destruction in the Amazon is something they're not really aware of. At the same time, they have this really dangerous view that the land is just unoccupied. It's the same national mythology that America was founded on, this idea of terra nullius, that there's an empty area on the map, and it's just up to them to go out and colonize it, turn that wilderness into private property. And that's really how these settlers view the Indigenous people there, as kind of an inconvenient obstacle in their inevitable road to the acquisition of this land.
And of course, you're doing this in a larger political context, and you're an American doing this film during President Trump. Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, has so often been called the Trump of the tropics. Can you talk about that relationship and what drove you to understand something you were seeing in the United States as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it in the physical iconography, the paraphernalia these farmers have, the big belt buckles, the Texas cowboy hats. They really believe in this American colonial project. Bolsonaro had a quote from the 1990s when he was a senator in Brazil where he said, "It's a shame the Brazilian cavalry hasn't been as efficient as the Americans. Now they don't have these indigenous problems in their country." And I think that idea, that really dangerous, violent, toxic idea is at the core of the way that a lot of these farmers and settlers view their relationship to America.
Can you talk about the making of the territory? In the film, we see Indigenous people, the people you are filming, also filming. Explain.
Yeah, during COVID, Bitete, the young leader of the Uruguay, said, no more cameras, no more journalists, no more documentary filmmakers, no more Alex. Nobody's coming into or out of our territory. And that was in part because of the collective memory of what happened to his community when they were forcibly assimilated and contacted by the Brazilian government in 1981. More than half of their population died within 2 years, largely from communicable diseases. So
this was an uncontacted population. Explain what that means until then.
Yeah, so as Brazil was building roads up into the Amazon, they had a policy that they would go out and forcibly contact and assimilate a lot of these isolated indigenous groups that were living autonomously in the region. And in a way to protect the people that were building these roads and invading that indigenous territory. And so in 1981, that happened to the Uruguay community. They were forcibly assimilated into the Brazilian state. A portion of the Uruguay remained isolated and said, we're not going to acquiesce to this forced contact by this new white group that's shown up and surrounded us. And so Bitate and the Uruguao, as they're protecting the forest and the plants and the animals, are also protecting their own relatives that remain in voluntary isolation, without knowledge of Bolsonaro or the Brazilian state, really living their lives in a more traditional way.
And so continue on the issue of the cameras. So Bitate,
Yes.
during COVID, says no more Alex, no more people from the outside. Take it from there.
Yeah, so when Bitate made that really brave decision to say nobody else is allowed into or out of our territory, we had to take stock as a film team and say, okay, do we have enough footage? Should we start editing? Where are we in the storytelling process? And that was an open conversation that we had with Bitate and the protagonists of our film. And Bitate said really clearly, no, we're not done. We can keep doing this. Just send us some cameras, send us better audio equipment, and we will produce, shoot, manage the production of the last chapter of this film. And so it was a big gamble at the time. It felt really risky and scary to me as a director. But looking back, I think it opened up all of these creative possibilities for us to be able to gain access and allow the audience to gain firsthand perspective into this Indigenous experience and leave the story in their hands and through their eyes.
Well, Alex Pritz, I want to thank you so much for being with us, Director of the Territory. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Joined right now by one of the people featured in the new film, The Territory. Bitate Urueawawao lives in the Jamari village on the Urueawao indigenous land in Rondônia, Brazil. He's coordinator of the Jupau Association since 2020, worked with the young citizens of the Amazon blog. Bitate, welcome to Democracy Now! And welcome to the United States.
Sim, muito obrigado pela recepção.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
So you have been chosen by the elders of your community to be the leader. You're a young man. How old are you?
Então, agora eu fui escolhido pelos anciões do meu povo, né?
I was chosen by the elders of my people.
Eu tenho 22 anos, eu fiz
I'm now 22 years old.
27 de junho. Mas
On 27 June, I turned 22, but I began from a young age taking on major responsibilities when I was 19 years old. And now I'm on the front lines fighting for my people.
Talk about what that means, fighting for your people on the front lines. Talk about what you're fighting for.
Então, eu acho que a gente está lutando pelo direito dos povos indígenas no Brasil.
We're fighting for the rights of indigenous peoples in Brazil.
Temos várias retrocessos contra os povos indígenas no Brasil.
Because several setbacks as indigenous peoples of Brazil, and this is leading us to be able to stand up for our rights as spelled out in the Constitution, significant rights, but of late,
desmoronado. A gente está perdendo o nosso direito.
These rights are being taken apart. We're losing our rights.
Vem aumentando dentro do território contra os povos indígenas do Brasil.
And this is happening more and more in the territories occupied by indigenous peoples in Brazil.
So I've just watched The Territory, this new film about you and your community and the Amazon. In it, you're fighting to preserve the Amazon, and we're listening to Bolsonaro, the president. Can you talk about what his presidency has meant to indigenous people? He said there won't be one more inch of indigenous reserve.
Então, vamos dizer assim, o governo do Bolsonaro, ele hoje não demarcou territórios indígenas, como ele vinha dito no leite, quando ele foi
indigenous territories, as
Brasil.
He said he would when he was running for president of Brazil. And today, he is wanting to reduce the scope of indigenous territories more and more, particularly my territory and other indigenous territories.
Tem várias terras indígenas em estudo para que possam ser demarcadas, mas com esse governo, ele
that are ready for demarcation, yet in his administration did not demarcate a single inch So he actually carried out what he said he would do in that sense. But for us indigenous peoples, this is a setback because we see a president who is not recognizing indigenous people's rights. He wants to take away those rights so as to turn the lands over to farming, agribusiness, and we, the indigenous peoples, don't accept that.
O que aconteceu com nossos antepassados de ser
don't want what happened with our ancestors to happen again. They're decimating our territories. We have suffered many threats because of this. We are subject to pressures by land invaders, by illegal prospecting and logging. And within our territories, there are also isolated indigenous peoples who have had no contact whatsoever with society, with civilized society. So to speak. They haven't even had contact with us, and I'm very concerned about this in the context of the Bolsonaro administration, because with that, the indigenous populations are being massacred. We're being killed by the actions taken by the government. At this time, we're trying to fight that, and we will never stop fighting for our territory and for our rights.
You made a critical decision as a young leader of your community at the beginning of the pandemic, saying people from outside could not come in. That also meant the filmmaker, Alex Pritz, and his team. And you said, why don't you give us the cameras? Talk about what that has meant for you as you frame your own reality. Talk about what you did and what you filmed, the story you feel you want people to know.
Então, acho que nós da pandemia, né, a gente tivemos problema
during
muito
the
grande.
pandemic, we had a major problem.
Não foi entrada de nenhuma pessoa de fora, incluindo também o Alex, que foi o nosso
such that we didn't let anyone in from outside, including Alex, who was the one who started all of
uma ideia
this.
muito boa, assim,
And so we had a very good idea, and it created an opportunity for us, indigenous peoples as well, so that we ourselves could show what our reality is. The indigenous peoples have a very different viewpoint than those who come from outside, and this was shown very clearly in the film, because we ourselves filmed our own stories. We filmed our own reality. We filmed far beyond where Alex and Gabriel could get to.
We're speaking about the new documentary, The Territory. In this clip, we meet Nigenia Bandera as she goes into the rainforest with the Urueawawao to investigate a report of invaders encroaching on their land and illegally cutting down trees.
There are traces of people and motorcycles.
Someone must have warned them we were coming.
They won't attack now. They're waiting for the right moment to come back.
They have left for now, but this isn't over.
We have to be ready when they come back.
That's a clip from The Territory featuring our next guest, Nigenia Bandera, who spent over 4 decades working directly with indigenous communities to defend their rights and protect their lands. She co-founded the nonprofit Candide Ethno-Environmental Defense Association to continue their work with indigenous populations. Nigenia, welcome to Democracy Now!
Obrigada. Agradeço a acolhida.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And it's great to be in a program that talks about democracy.
Talk about the greatest threats to the indigenous community in Brazil and to the rainforest.
Não tem como falar de floresta amazônica.
I can't talk about the Amazon forest in Brazil without speaking of the indigenous peoples. And today, the main rights that are being taken away are the right to the land, the right to health, the right to education, the right to live free. These are setbacks we are suffering in Brazil. For many years, we struggled to have a constitution that would explicitly guarantee indigenous peoples' rights. And we achieved that with the 1988 Constitution. It's just that with the current administration, the Bolsonaro administration, and with our Congress, which is filled with people who don't represent the indigenous peoples, who don't represent the Black people in Brazil, who don't represent the social movements in Brazil, we are seeing that our rights are being taken away. The right to life, the right to live well, the right to have a balanced climate for everyone, not just for us. Those are being taken away. The right to have a democracy in Brazil. Democracy is in danger in Brazil, and this danger also includes not allowing indigenous peoples to enjoy their right to land and to their territories.
Do you think that Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva represents something different in Brazil from what Bolsonaro has been as president?
Com certeza absoluta, Lula é a diferença.
Absolutely. Lula is the difference. Today, people are fighting, we are fighting, for Bolsonaro to not be reelected. Under the Lula administration, the poorest people got education. The poorest people were able to eat. The poorest people were able to get services from the health system, which provided those health services. But none of that is working today. Today, the Bolsonaro administration has openly stated that he is not going to demarcate any more land. He has declared that the lands are already demarcated. Lands already guaranteed for the indigenous peoples may indeed be diminished. And he has the support of the Congress. What must be clear is that it is not enough to just change the president in Brazil. You need to change the president of Brazil, but also change a large part of the Congress. Because Bolsonaro was only able to do many of the absurd things that he has done because the Congress did not stop him from doing so. So, coming elections are extremely important for the Brazilian people. So are the assurances that our constitution will remain in place and that our rights will be respected. That is our struggle. Now, I'm not going to say that Lula was the best thing that we've seen for the indigenous peoples and the environment, because that's not true. Now, one thing I can guarantee you is that he was better than Bolsonaro.